Welcome to today's program, and thank you for joining us. I am C. Virginia Fields, former Manhattan Borough President and current President and CEO of the National Black Leadership Commission on Health, Incorporated, formerly the National Black Leadership Commission on AIDS. And we are furthering its mission of advocacy and empowerment to include 8 key areas of disparities in Black health: HIV/AIDS, hepatitis C, cardiovascular disease, breast cancer, prostate cancer, sickle cell, diabetes, and mental health. And today on our show, we'll discuss Census 2020, a subject that is very important to all New Yorkers, regardless of immigration status. And to discuss the city's efforts around the census, we have Dr. Phil Thompson, Deputy Mayor for Strategic Policy Initiatives, and he is responsible for spearheading a diverse collection of policy initiatives. This expansive portfolio includes the Minority and Women-Owned Business Enterprise Program, the Mayor's Office of Workforce Development, and the Young Men's Initiative, and now New York City Census 2020. We also have Julie Menin as an attorney and civic leader with over 2 decades of experience in the legal, regulatory, and public sectors. She currently serves as the director of New York City Census 2020, as well as the executive assistant corporation counsel at the New York City Law Department. Julie previously served as the New York City Commissioner of the Department of Consumer Affairs. So let me say welcome, Deputy Mayor Thompson and 2020 Census Director Julie Menin. Thank you so much for joining us. And this is kind of a different sort of topic, so to speak, because we tend to focus more on specific health issues. But I consider health to be a very important reason why, too, we should be including and talking about the census, because we know that the dollars affects all of that. Recently, we understand that New York City officially kicked off the city's Complete Count campaign. This is a $40 million initiative, and that seems to be the largest and the most diverse coordinated municipal effort to achieve a complete and accurate 2020 census count. The Census Outreach Campaign, as a result or because of this $40 million initiative, involves a partnership between the Mayor's Administration, the City Council, City University of New York, and 157 community-based organizations across all 5 boroughs, of which our organization, the National Black Leadership Commission on Health, is very pleased to be a part of. And it also includes the city's 3 public library systems, labor unions, civic and private institutions. This is a serious issue. March 12th is the date that New York City residents will start to receive census notification. Talk to us a little, each one of you, in terms of comments you might want to make as to what is the census and why does it matter?
Oh, okay. Well, thank you so much for having me. Both the Deputy Mayor and I are thrilled to be here. And I'll start by really saying that the census is one of the most important things that is affecting New York City's future. And I say that because we're fighting for our fair share of over $650 billion that the federal government allocates nationwide each and every year. So this is funding for public education, public housing. You talked about healthcare, Medicaid, senior centers, Head Start, and yet the city has had an abysmal track record around the census. In 2020, the city's self-response rate was 61.9%, and in parts of Brooklyn, particularly central Brooklyn, 55.5%, and in some places even lower than that. So that's why the administration really organized this effort around the census, because we can and we must do better. This is a nationwide competition, so for every New Yorker that doesn't fill the census out, this funding just goes to other states.
I would also add that census has a direct relationship to health, and particularly community health, and particularly racial disparities in health, in that our bodies don't lie. And one of the findings in studies of Black health is that stress is a major, if not the major factor in disparities in coronary vascular disease and even cancer. And unemployment and poverty are the leading causes of stress. And another cause of stress are you're worried about your kids, and are they in school? How are they doing in school? How are the schools functioning? What's happening on the streets? Census determines to a significant extent how much money comes to help improve our schools, or help to create jobs in New York City, or make housing affordable in New York City, which are major sources of stress and distress in communities of color that have direct health impacts.
Absolutely. Now, you've called the census, in terms of several presentations we've heard you make, that the census is a civil rights issue. Just talk a little bit more about what you mean when you say it's a civil rights issue.
Well, since the 1970s, conservative thinkers like the political scientist Ben Wattenberg, who had a TV program with Buckley for many years, he started writing that around now, between now and 2050, the United States would become a country mainly of color. And he said that is something that conservatives ought to be worried about, because he was concerned that people of color may have different policy priorities, and that's something he didn't want to see. And he started advocating then that they design strategies to delay the impact of that demographic change in America. So one of the things he talked about was voter suppression. Another thing he talked about was district gerrymandering when it came to drawing election districts, which are done based on the census. Another thing he talked about was ending birthright citizenship, which is something conservatives in Congress are discussing now, which means if you're born in this country, regardless of where your parents came from, you are automatically a citizen, something Black people fought for during the Civil War. They're talking about getting rid of that. Census is yet another tool to undercount certain communities, communities of color in particular, so as to delay that transfer or that progression of power. And so I say the census is a civil rights issue because it is still about fighting for the equal rights of every American citizen.
And also we have to remember the citizenship question fight that we waged. So we joined forces at the City Law Department with the New York Attorney General's office and others to sue the Trump administration to take the citizenship question off the census. We won that case fair and square at the Supreme Court. That's the good news. But the bad news is the damage was largely done by the Trump administration. Why did they ask this question? Why did they want this question so desperately on the census? Because they wanted to hurt immigrant communities and communities of color. That's what this whole fight was about, to defund progressive cities like New York and others that have large immigrant communities and communities of color, to have them lose political representation and to move that funding and political representation largely to red Republican areas. So that's why we also say this is a large civil rights issue.
And just based on what you said, and I think, Julie, you mentioned in your comments that in 2010, New York count was somewhere like almost 62%, 61.9%. And based on that, has it been shown that the lack has basically been in communities of color, that Blacks and Latinos really accounts for a lot of this shortfall as to why we're targeting this population so
Absolutely, absolutely, we can show that. So certainly in the Black community, in the Latino community, also in the Orthodox Jewish community, these are communities that have had traditionally lower response rates, and that's why we have to double down on our efforts to turn those numbers around. We have to remember that the messaging that has been done around the census in 2010 and in 2000 was largely done by the federal government, and that messaging was fill the census out, it's in the Constitution, it's your civic duty, it's a law. Well, you know what? That just doesn't resonate. And that's why this time we're running a media campaign to really explain to people, if you don't take the 2 minutes to fill this out, you will lose funding at your child's local public school, or your mother's senior center, or your neighbor's Head Start program. We have to explain to people what's really at stake with the census.
Given all that we're hearing about immigration and concerns of people stepping forward to be counted, talk a little about immigrants in terms of our assuring that the importance of immigrant communities participating and not being fearful about deportation or being discovered, and the kind of fears that we hear a lot of discussions about.
Well, as Julie said, we think the Trump administration deliberately posed "Are you an immigrant?" question on the census in order to frighten immigrant communities from filling out the census as a way of engineering an undercount. And the census is safe, it's protected by law, and Julie can talk about the legal aspects of this. And there are over 3.5 million immigrants in New York City. So when immigrants don't fill out the census, has a heavy impact on everyone who lives in New York City.
Absolutely. And so as a deputy mayor, the census is protected by law, 100%. Specifically, it's protected by Title 13 of the U.S. Code, which imposes up to 5-year prison sentence, up to $250,000 fine on any federal employee who shares that data, and it's a lifetime ban. So we need to make sure New Yorkers know the census is 100% confidential and it's safe to fill out. But yet, conversely, the repercussions of not filling it out, of saying, I'm not going to fill this out, are really tremendous. We will lose out on hundreds of millions of dollars. We'll also lose out on congressional representation. In the mid-1950s, we had 45 members of Congress in the New York congressional delegation. Now we have 27. In an undercount, we could lose up to two seats statewide. We could go to 25 members of Congress. And let's be clear about where do those seats go. Again, they are largely going to red Republican areas. And I mention that not to be overtly political, but to just mention the facts about what's really happening here and to make sure that we're motivating New Yorkers about the importance about the census.
So this is extremely important. So now you raised another question for me, and that is, through this initiative, working with community-based organizations, labor unions, this is the very first time that we are making such a broad outreach into these communities, because I only remember the census by and large coming, getting something in the mail.
Right.
Now that will still continue, but given the different housing situations that we have here in New York, how are we prepared to make sure we reach all of the people we want to get counted?
I'll start on this and pass it to Julie, but one of the things we're doing as a city, we are letting everyone who lives in public housing or lives in Section 8 housing or any kind of subsidized housing know that any information you provide about who's in your apartment, whether they're on the lease or not, is private and confidential. The landlord, the city itself will never see that data. So we know that there are a lot of families who are doubled up in housing because of how expensive housing is. And a lot of folks are afraid to fill out the census because they're afraid they'll lose their apartment. That will not happen as a result of the census. So we're doing outreach with community groups, and as you said, labor unions, with the janitors in the schools, with the teachers in the schools, with students themselves, with everyone we can reach in order to get the message out. It's safe to fill out the census, and we need to make a statement as a city. We are all together here. We are one, and we are fighting for our democracy. Census is no less than that. because if you're undercounted on the census, it means you don't get your fair share in the city council, in the state legislature, in Congress, and that translates into dollars and cents. And what happens to your kids?
So the Federal Census Bureau estimates that our self-response is going to fall in 2020 from 61.9%, where we were in 2010, to 58%. And I mention that because New Yorkers need to understand that they're estimating that our numbers will fall. We are counteracting that by basically using every tool in our toolbox. So as the Deputy Mayor mentioned, we're working with NYCH, we're going to be working with the Department of Education, with the UFT, we're working with every stakeholder. We are working with the public library system, so the public library branches will all have computer terminals where people will be able to go in and fill out the census. They'll be open extra hours, they'll have dedicated trained staff who can talk to people about the census. One of the other ways that we're really focusing on this is, for the first time, this is an online census. So people can literally fill the census out on their phone, on a computer, by telephone, calling a 1-800 number. So to be clear, there are 3 ways now that you can fill the census out: the traditional paper form, or on your computer, or by phone. And I mention that because that presents opportunities, obviously, as well as challenges at the same time.
So under the count of working with all of the community-based organizations, including our own organization, could you just speak specifically in terms of what does that look like? What would be a plan for making sure we're getting into every corner, every housing, or everywhere where people are, where people live, reside, play, do business, worship? So just walk us through some steps of what an organization might be doing.
So one of the things that we've done is we've come up with a Neighborhood Organizing Census Committee, NOCCS, or knocks for short, like knock on the door. And the knocks are basically a way that people can volunteer locally in their neighborhood. They can phone bank, they can do text messaging. And we partner the local Neighborhood Organizing Committee with community groups. So they're partnered together to make sure that every single facet of a neighborhood is covered. One of the things that is so interesting about this online census is the fact that we're going to know how every community is doing once this kicks off. So this kicks off on March 12th, and we're going to be getting real-time data from the Federal Census Bureau by neighborhood. So we're going to be able to tell every community how they're doing, how they're responding, and what neighborhoods are not responding. So to your point, that's going to be a real organizing tool for us. We're working with houses of worship, 1,000 houses of worship around the city. So there's so many different ways to get involved in the census. In partnering, Virginia, with organizations like yours, I mean, one of the things we're obviously doing is working on phone banking, working on text messaging campaigns, working on making sure that every single leader in the community, that we're working with them, and that then they're going out to their network, so that we're not overlooking any single part of any neighborhood.
And one of the reasons I'm really happy your organization is involved is because my hope is that once we have everyone's attention in the city and people are doing outreach and mobilizing, we can continue after the census to build on that momentum to address issues such as disparities in public health. Right now, we have a multi-billion-dollar deficit at the state level in Medicaid. Well, the best way to save money in healthcare is to keep people out of the hospital in the first place. And so maybe this coalition can transition into advocating for programs that actually make communities healthier. And that is how we can solve our medical system problems, by focusing on prevention, on keeping people healthy, and actually getting people engaged in the process and making change is a good first step.
Now, obviously, this is a very comprehensive, very well thought out plan in terms of the many phases of it, as you have been discussing. How do we get here? How did we decide here in the city to have such a broad, comprehensive approach? I think it's fabulous, and maybe we should transport it to other cities and states. But how do we get here?
Well, really, the impetus behind this was the citizenship question. We have to remember that 2 years ago, the Trump administration threatened and did try to unsuccessfully and illegally add a question to the census asking, are you a U.S. citizen? This would have caused depressed response rates in cities like New York. So the mayor, who was very focused on that, appointed me as census director under the deputy mayor's portfolio, and really there was a real concerted effort. There were many people who thought that we were going to lose the citizenship case. I mean, that was what pundits said nationwide, that the city was going to lose the case. Now, while we won that Supreme Court case, our work is still more vital than ever, because again, the majority of hard-to-count New Yorkers that we need to reach, many of them erroneously think the citizenship question is still on the census. In fact, there's not a day that goes by that someone doesn't say to me, I'm not going to fill the census out because that question is on. And we need to explain to them, no, actually, it's not on the census. So that was one of the reasons why this work we needed to organize in this city fashion. And let me just say, it's a real partnership with the City Council. This is a great joint effort by the administration and by the City Council to jointly approach this work around the census. And also the other reason is because of census is online. This presents all sorts of challenges. We don't know how the online census is going to work. To be clear, it hasn't really been beta tested in the field. As much as we have told the Federal Census Bureau to do so, they have failed to do that. So again, we're in really uncharted territory here.
I would add that I think the mayor made a courageous decision, given our budget circumstances a year ago, to allocate almost $27 million for the census. And I would also give credit to a lot of the community groups and immigrant groups that said, we want to play a role here. We are the people the communities trust. And they pressed for funding, and the mayor said yes, and gave basically half of the $40 million is going directly to them. And the mayor also insisted we use community and ethnic media to reach people. And so I think from top to bottom, there's been buy-in. And in the business community, they have their own census initiative. So I've never seen this kind of broad-based participatory engagement ever across all sectors in New York City.
So with the business community doing their own, those are additional dollars to the 40 million that's coming out of the public coffers?
There's a lot of effort both in the private sector and the philanthropic community to do additional efforts. To be clear, we're partnering with them because, again, we have to make sure that the response is completely coordinated. The state also is involved in their census efforts. So it's really an all hands on deck approach. And we need this because I can't think of any other analogy where you have to make sure that your campaign is reaching everyone. It's like a political campaign in one sense, and then it's not, because we have to reach Republicans, we have to reach independents, we have to reach Democrats, we have to reach those that are not politically involved at all. We have to reach every single demographic, and that is challenging at best.
At best, very challenging. So for someone watching the program and they're interested in volunteering, how can they do that? They've heard you and say they want to get involved and they want to make sure that we reach the communities, especially ones that they may be specifically concerned about. So how can they get involved and stay involved?
The best way is to join one of our neighborhood organizing census committees. They can go to our website at nyc.gov/census, and literally they can click on the map of their neighborhood and get involved. They can volunteer as little as an hour a week, as many hours as they want. They can volunteer from their own home. We give them lists to phone bank, text messaging. There's so many different ways to be involved. And let me just say, we have a lot of volunteers who are volunteering in other neighborhoods. They want to volunteer in hard-to-count communities. So we have those opportunities as well. There's really no more important issue that is going to affect our future for the next decade than the census. There's almost no important program in New York City that doesn't depend on us getting a proper count. So I know it's trite to say there's so much at stake, but there literally is so much at stake with the census. So it's just a great initiative to be involved in.
And our federal partners, the regional division of the Department of Commerce that manages census, they're going to hire 82,000 people to knock on doors in a few months after the online period is over, and those jobs will pay $28 an hour. And there are opportunities for folks in the neighborhoods to actually do outreach in their own neighborhoods. So for that, they should contact the Census Bureau directly.
At 2020 Census for the website.
Online.
So what's the timeline again for the online period?
Sure.
dates?
So the census kicks off on March 12th. And on March 12th, you can go to the website, which is 2020 Census. That's the federal census website. And in 2 minutes, you can answer the 10 questions and you are done with the census. If you don't, though, you're going to get 4 mailings from the Federal Census Bureau reminding you to fill it out. As soon as you fill it out, you will not be receiving additional mailings. So to be clear, if you don't want to receive additional mailings or you don't want the federal government to come knock on your door, because they will come knock on your door if you haven't filled it out by late April, early May, just fill the census out. If we could just get every New Yorker to self-respond to the census, either online, by telephone, or by mail, there would not be door knocking in New York City. And let me just say, with the door knocking, we understand that in this climate in particular, people are not going to be opening up a door for a stranger. That door knocker, however, can legally talk to your neighbor. They can talk to folks they meet in the hallway to try to get the information about how many people live in that unit. We do not want that to happen. We want every New Yorker to self-respond because that's the best data, and that's how we make sure that we do not lose out on hundreds of millions of dollars.
So those dates are important. The 12th of March, online, late April, early May, door knocking. With the few seconds or so that we have remaining, are there any other comments that either of you would like to make that perhaps we've not covered?
I would just do a shout out to the City University of New York, which has been our partner in reaching out to all the community groups. And there is a CUNY Census Corps as well of hundreds of CUNY students, and they're really important for this whole outreach effort because they tend to speak every language that is spoken in New York as well as English. And for their parents or for folks in their own communities who may not even understand one of the 59 languages that Census is using right now, everyone needs to be talked to, and they're best talked to in their own language. And so CUNY students are really helpful in doing that kind of outreach.
Well, let me thank both of you. You have given us a wealth of information, and because this program runs frequently, we have a chance to really talk to a number of the people about the census. So let me just thank our Deputy Mayor Phil Thompson and our 2020 Census Director Julie Menin for joining us today. And again, for more information about the census, visit nyc.gov/census. And for more information about our organization, visit our website, NBLCH.org. Also look for us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and the Manhattan Neighborhood Network brings these programs to you to better inform you, the viewer, about the important topics that impact your health and well-being. So please let your family, friends, and neighbors know about this programming. And I am C. Virginia Fields, and I thank you for joining us and hope you'll tune in next time for Health Action TV right here on Manhattan Neighborhood Network.